This is a 34-year-old gamer who spent his entire adult life alone in his room. One day, he is hit by a truck. In his final moments, his only regret in life is that he is dying as a virgin. But something feels wrong. Darkness is replaced with light. He opens his eyes and sees a strange man and an attractive woman. He wonders what the hell is going on when the man kisses him straight on the lips, but immediately shifts his attention to the plot developing before him. He refuses to let this opportunity slip. He reaches out to cop a feel, but after seeing his tiny arms, he gets it. His previous life has been left behind and has reincarnated as a baby. Their names are Paul and Zenith, his new parents. His name is Rudy, short for Rudius Greyrat. As he gets accustomed to his new body, Rudy does not hold back. He fulfills all his desires of old, unwilling to die again with the same regrets. Lilia, who is a maid of the Greyrat family, sees the demonic presence within him. She fears the perverted eyes that stare underneath her breasts. Zenith comforts Lilia, confident that a baby his age doesn't know any better, or so she thinks. At first, he thinks he is somewhere in the countryside of Europe, but after he sees Paul swing around a sword and Zenith heal him of his wounds, Rudy quickly realizes that he is reborn in a different world entirely. At a very young age, Rudy masters the language of his new world. He wastes no time studying the arts of magic, casting his first spell at the age of 2. Despite the use of incantations in this world, Rudy finds that he has a special gift and that he can cast spells without saying the words. Even though the new environment poses more distractions heard through the thin walls of his room, Rudy maintains his gamer personality, grinding those levels while staying cooped up in his room. In no time, Rudy is able to cast intermediate magic spells. As a student of magic herself, Zenith is ecstatic to find out that Rudy is a magical genius, and immediately finds him a tutor. Her name is Roxy. Rudy is pleasantly surprised that she is a cute loli. In their very first session, Rudy immediately sees that there is more to Roxy than meets the eye. Uninterested in the perverted eyes of a baby boy, Roxy is more surprised of her student's innate ability, jealous that he can cast spells without saying the words. Nevertheless, she decides to stay with the Greyrats and train him. While practicing his earth magic in his room, he hears Paul and Zenith go at it again. He thinks it would be fun to see their reaction when he walks in on them and says, "Mommy, Daddy, what are you doing?" Leaving his room, Rudy is surprised to see Roxy taking notes on the plot development while developing her own plot. Satisfied by the plot twist, Rudy calls it a night. The pair continue their lessons for months, and Rudy is able to cast intermediate magic without breaking a sweat. All the while, he remains a disciplined student, even paying close attention to the plot-filled history lessons through visual stimulation. Rudy shows his excitement to learn that there are spirits and demons in this world, to which Roxy replies that despite her looks, she is, in fact, a demon. She adds that demons come in all different forms, both good and bad. Her purple hair race are a peaceful kind called the Mage. Then there are the supered, green hair with a red gem on their forehead, an infamous race of warriors who sided with the demon lord named Laplace for 100 years ago and feared across all the lands. Roxy says that she hates her hair color as it sometimes turns greenish in the wrong kind of light. Rudy comforts her by saying that he thinks her hair is beautiful. Roxy thanks him but says to save the comment for when he meets a person he likes. Rudy is quick with his words, saying that he likes Roxy, to which she replies to try again in 10 years. At the end of the lesson, Rudy tries to catch her changing, but unfortunately, Roxy knows and shoos him away. After a year of training, Rudy is able to cast advanced magic spells without depleting a lot of mana. Meanwhile, Paul trains him in swordsmanship, but much to his disappointment, Rudy is slow in his progress. On his 5th birthday, Rudy receives a wand from Roxy. He is disappointed, however, when Roxy says that teachers give their students a wand when they are ready to graduate. He wants her to stay and teach him more, but Roxy states that there is nothing more that she has to offer, as he has already grown to become a better mage than her. Rudy is heartbroken when Roxy says that tomorrow will be his final lesson. He is also hesitant when Roxy says they will travel away from town. It is then we see flashbacks of his previous life, when he developed agoraphobia. As a fat loser with no friends, he was an outcast and a victim of bullying, subsequently developing an intense fear of being around strangers. However, Roxy forces him to face his fear head-on, cradling him as they head out. Roxy comforts him by saying that she is right by his side. As they head across town, Rudy sees all the good people exchanging kind words with Roxy, realizing that the bullies of old have been left behind. Away from the town now, Roxy demonstrates the spell she would like for him to learn.
Now come, O rain! Sweep all else away! Cumulonimbus!
Covered in a dark, ominous cloud, Roxy creates a thundercloud and causes torrential rain to pour down with lightning strikes. Inspired and awed by all that Roxy has taught him, Rudy joyfully chants the words and summons an immense cloud that is a sight to behold.
Cumulonimbus! Look at that!
After teaching her best spell, Roxy acknowledges Rudy was able to learn all that she has mastered in a lifetime. Both proud and inspired by her pupil, Roxy decides to set out on a journey to travel the world and hone her own abilities as a mage. Before she leaves, she congratulates him for successfully graduating 4 levels to become a Saint class mage in just 2 years. Roxy gives him one last gift to commemorate his success. Unknowingly to her, Rudy has already taken it upon himself to never forget her. As Rudy prays to his new favorite possession every morning, Paul is seen copping a feel on his wife's bottom. Now able to venture out of his home, Rudy takes a pleasant stroll around town when he sees 3 kids throwing rocks at a hooded child. He immediately sprints towards them and throws water at one of the kids' face. After missing a couple of shots, the bullies decide to leave. Rudy asks if he is okay and is surprised to see that he is a handsome fellow. Rudy introduces himself and the child says his name is Sylphie. Over the next 6 months, Rudy teaches him magic and is surprised how capable Sylphie is as a mage. After getting soaked in the rain, the two head back to Rudy's place. Rudy brings Sylphie up to his room so they can take a bath. Rudy casually takes off his clothes and asks why Sylphie isn't doing the same. Impatient, Rudy grabs Sylphie's clothes, but he begins to resist. He eventually forces off the top and proceeds to take off the bottom, but is again faced with resistance. He thinks that Sylphie is just shy about showing his cucumber, but also doesn't want to be the only person with his cucumber out. So he tricks her. That's right, her. He finds that there was never a said cucumber behind the trouser. No, instead, it was a duck. He is shocked as this is the first time he has ever seen a duck in a place other than his computer monitor. He is overwhelmed with guilt and doesn't think she'll ever forgive him. Rudy asks Paul for advice, believing that wooing women is his area of expertise. Paul tells him to be honest with Sylphie and tell her how much he misses her. When he gets the chance, he opens himself up, and Sylphie takes it well, saying that she also wishes that they were able to hang out like before. Happy that they made up, Paul joins the two, but wonders if it's a good thing that his son is becoming more like his dad. The next episode begins with the most joyous of occasions. Zenith announces that she is pregnant. The families celebrate together, until suddenly, Lilia also announces that she is pregnant.
Forgive me, Zenith. That child's it's probably mine.
Devastated, Zenith sits down with Lilia to have a one-on-one conversation. As they sit together, Zenith asks Lilia what she will do. Lilia responds that after she helps with Zenith's childbirth, she will raise her own back at her hometown. Zenith knows Lilia's home is a month's ride south, making it impossible for her or the baby to survive the trip. As there is nowhere else for her to go, Lilia says she has no other option. When Paul tries to put in a word, Zenith tells him to shut the front door. Rightfully so, Zenith is conflicted. Even with what happened, how can she send someone to her death, let alone a newborn child? Rudy also doesn't want to lose Lilia as he notes everything that she has done for him. She gets him towels when he's training, sets up baths after being stuck out in the rain, and she even hides his perverted tendencies like stealing Roxy's panties and staring at her gigantic watermelons. And so, Rudy decides to speak. He makes up a lie, saying that he heard Paul force it upon Lelia to do the hump-diddy-dump, and that none of this is Lelia's fault. He said that he saw Paul go into Lelia's room and tell her to spread her legs if she doesn't want anyone to find out. Paul tries to defend himself, but is shut down once again by Zenith. Rudy drives the point home, saying that Lelia should not get in trouble for something she couldn't control. Unable to fight the plea of her one and only son, Zenith gives into her conscience, allowing Lelia to raise her child in their home. Paul is relieved and Lelia is overcome with tears. The next day, we hear Lelia's perspective. She doesn't believe she should have been spared. Hearing the plot development made by Paul and Zenith every night, Lelia, a grown woman in a house with no other men, gave into her desires and seduced Paul. Lelia believes she should have been punished for her betrayal, but nonetheless is thankful to Rudy for saving her life. She admits that she was frightened of Rudy, believing that he was possessed by a demon, as he would always stare at her watermelons with a perverted grin ever since he stepped out of his mother's womb. But because he saved her life, Lelia says that she will commit to raising her child to serve Rudy the way she serves Paul and Zenith. A while later, Norn and Aisha are born. As she is now much more open to talking to Rudy, Lelia tells him stories of Paul and what he was like before he married Zenith. She told him that when she was a virgin, Paul once tried to make her a cucumber salad while she was sleeping, confirming Rudy's impression that Paul is scum. Still, Rudy acknowledges Paul's skills as a swordsman, having mastered the three main sword techniques of this world: Sword God, Water God, and North God. Paul taunts Rudy as they train, saying that Rudy's swordplay has stagnated. Paul proudly asks if Rudy wants to be a cool guy like his dad, to which Rudy responds that he doesn't want to be a guy that cheats on his wife. Rudy tells Paul to keep his hands off any other girl if he doesn't want to hear the low blow comment from his son, to which Paul whispers and asks if he means any other girl besides Zenith and Lelia, or just Zenith. Paul knows that his son is just as horny as he is, bringing Sylphie into the matter. Rudy admits this fact. Even though his father is scum, he admits they both speak the same language. Later, while seeing Sylphie advance her magic skills, Rudy contemplates the idea of school. During their tutoring sessions, Roxy mentioned a school called Renoa University. As the world's largest magic school, Roxy believed that Rudy should continue his magical studies there. Lately, Rudy has been feeling like he hasn't been improving, understanding that this small village he calls home can't offer him anything more. As he shares his thoughts, Sylphie begins to burst into tears, telling Rudy that she doesn't want him to leave her. He comforts her, telling her that he will never do such a thing. After his interaction with Sylphie, Rudy fantasizes about spending a life with her, developing his plot while calling out her name. When Paul catches him in the act, he tells Rudy that he received a letter from Roxy. In the letter, Roxy notes that she is now at the royal capital of the Chiron Kingdom, tutoring the 7th prince in the city. She adds that he is not as talented as a mage, but just as horny as Rudy, stealing her panties and developing plot whenever he gets the chance. She also mentions that she is now a king class mage, which is one step above saint class. Given the growth she has seen in him, Roxy also wrote that she estimates that by now, Rudy would have probably hit Emperor class. Facing the reality of the situation, Rudy again has the urge to attend school. The next day, Rudy asks Paul if he can request an unreasonable favor, to which Paul immediately replies saying he may not. After both Lelia and Zenith kick him in the shin, Zenith responds by saying that he can ask for whatever he wants. Rudy wants to attend Renoa, but he tells them about Sylphie's crying plea, to which Paul takes the credit for teaching his son to be a lady killer. Rudy hopes for Paul to pay for both his and Sylphie's tuition so they can attend Renoa together. When Paul says that they don't have that kind of money, Rudy says he understands, but instead asks Paul to get him a job so that he can earn enough to pay for Sylphie himself. Although Paul doesn't think it's right for Rudy to give Sylphie a free pass on life like that, he reluctantly agrees. Several days later, we meet Ghislaine, a former member of Paul's harem and a badass beast woman with a huge rack. She is here to pick up Rudy as they will head out to his new job. Paul intentionally found a job for him away from this town so that Sylphie and Rudy can spend some time apart. He believes it is in both of their interests, as Sylphie's dependence on Rudy is unhealthy for them in the long run. After Lilia and Zenith say their goodbyes, Paul says his with a final sparring match. Rudy puts up a good fight, but Paul eventually knocks him out. When he wakes up, Rudy is being carted off with Ghislaine, wondering where his next destination will be. When Rudy wakes up, Ghislaine hands him a letter written by Paul. He tells Rudy that he'll be tutoring math and magic to a noble woman in the city of Roa. In exchange for continuing his sword training, Paul notes that he'll also be tutoring Ghislaine. He assures Rudy that Ghislaine is the best there is, admitting that the only fights he has ever won against her was the one in the bedroom. He also tells him to feel free making moves on the noble woman he'll be teaching, but to keep his hands off Ghislaine, prompting her to tell Rudy to send that letter to Zenith. When he gets to the manor, Rudy checks out the hot beast servants, thinking that his employers have good taste in women. Philip enters and introduces himself as a gray rat and the cousin of Rudy's father, while Rudy is surprised that his family name carries nobility. Before he is hired, Philip mentions that he needs to get the blessing of his daughter, whom he'll be teaching. When he meets her, Rudy feels the intensity emanating from Eris. She immediately hates Rudy because he is younger than her, on top of the fact that math and magic are her least favorite topics to learn. When Rudy argues that his age isn't relevant, Eris slaps him and asks if he knows who he's talking to. Rudy has balls bigger than any 7-year-old you know, as he slaps her back. But big balls don't help him here as Eris rips him a new hole.
Wait, please! Get back here, scum! I'm going to pulverize you!
Later, Philip and Rudy reconvene, and Philip is surprised when Rudy says he won't quit winning her approval, since all the other tutors he tried to hire quit by this point. Rudy suggests a plan to convince Eris that magic is useful to learn.
All right, in that case, here's what I need you to do.
During the night, the plan is in effect. Rudy and Eris have been kidnapped, all part of Rudy's grand plan to show his power when he saves the day using magic. Eris wakes up and rages as she starts banging on the door when a large man enters. Happy that they chose such a convincing-looking actor, Rudy winks at the man like he has Tourette syndrome. The man begins to go at Eris and goes at her some more as he clobbers her face. Rudy is a bit shocked at the realistic performance, but when the man swings, Rudy gives him another 2 winks, causing the man to think he's a disabled person as he walks away. After healing her, Rudy tells Eris he's escaping through the window. Eris demands Rudy to take her with him. He tells her that he will, only if she stops hitting him and obeys his instructions. Despite putting up a front, Eris is now scared after taking a beating and begins to listen to Rudy's words. When they get back into town, the pair see the man from the manor. The two let their guard down, when suddenly, a hooded figure snatches Eris. Rudy follows and blocks the kidnapper's way. When Rudy asks them to release Eris, the man from the manor says that they can't as they need to sell Eris to get very rich. Rudy understands now that this isn't a game. The kidnappers offer Rudy 100 gold coins to walk away, enough to pay 10x the tuition for Renoa University with change left over. Rudy says the offer is tempting, but that there are more things to life than money.
Money can't buy waifus!
Ghislaine has been alerted.
Damn it!
Rudy manages to grab a hold of Eris, but is helpless as the sword throw catches him off guard. Rudy is frozen. It is the first time he has witnessed a death in this world. He knew at this point that the kidnappers were real, but it didn't hit home until he saw a man slaughtered in front of his face. Up until now, Rudy treated this new life as a game, but realized in this very moment that he may not be as lucky to get another chance at life this time around. Rudy also thinks he failed as Eris storms away. It was his fault that Philip's daughter was put into this mess of a situation, and without Ghislaine, Rudy knew that both he and Eris wouldn't have made it back. But to his surprise, Eris tells Rudy to stay as her teacher. Eris doesn't give an explanation, but Rudy is just happy that he did enough to get her blessing. The next day, Rudy meets Hilda, Philip's wife, and to no one's surprise, Rudy checks out her character development. Rudy meets Soros, father to Philip and the head of the Boreas Grey Rat household. Soros is a strict and boisterous man that tends to speak his mind out loud. He thanks Rudy for saving his granddaughter and instructs Eris to request Rudy politely to be her tutor. Eris is reluctant, but obeys him as Soros is not the type to take her bickering.
Won't you please teach Eris how to do magic now? Huh?
The butler explains to the confused Rudy that the Boreas household is very fond of beast people, explaining that the pose is meant to emulate their ears. Over the next several days, Rudy finds that Eris and Ghislaine are studious in their magic lessons, but is troubled by Eris's lack of effort in mathematics. She occasionally runs away from them, and Rudy is left to chase after her. When he finds her sleeping on a haystack, Rudy tells Eris to wake up if she doesn't want him to develop plot. She doesn't respond, so Rudy goes for it. As he measures out her character development, Rudy sees the potential for her to mature into a beautiful woman, thinking that she'll one day grow to be Annie Cup. After a tasty appetizer, Rudy goes for the main course. Rudy and Eris also train to master the sword under Ghislaine, and it becomes quickly apparent that Eris is much more capable in the art of the sword, while Rudy continues to struggle. In town, Rudy comes across a man who decides that it would be a good idea to sell an aphrodisiac to a 7-year-old. Fortunately for him, this 7-year-old is a pervert who takes interest in such things. Eris caught him staring at the item and decides to buy it for him as a present, unbeknownst to what it is. She thinks it's some sort of medicine, but when Rudy accidentally drops it, he slips and shouts, "Aphrodisiac," leading to his demise as he faces the wrath of the girls. The three spend 2 years training in their respective categories. Ghislaine compliments Eris for becoming advanced rank in the sword god style. Eris is a natural with the sword while Rudy continues to struggle. The girls make progress in magic, but Eris continues to resist with her studies. Meanwhile, Rudy also keeps up with his perverted hobbies, perfecting his sculptures of Roxy with precision and detail. He eventually sells it for 1 gold piece and finds out that the sculpture made its way to the prince whom Roxy is teaching. Roxy notes in a letter to Rudy that the sculpture is shockingly accurate, highlighting the fact that it even has her moles in the right places. On his 10th birthday, Rudy receives a staff from Eris, who thanks him for everything he has done for her. At night, Philip sends her daughter into Rudy's room. Due to some political struggles within the Boreas and Nodo's Grey Rat families, Philip ploys to get Rudy and Eris married so that they can merge the two families. Rudy doesn't want to be a part of a family power struggle, but he can't resist when a pretty girl is in his bed. He tries to hold back, so he tells Eris that she should leave or else he'll do something dirty. Eris says she'll allow it, but just a little. He's surprised at her response, but he immediately goes for it since she verbally gave the green light. Rudy can't hold back as he warms up his fingers. He is about to develop plot when suddenly...
No! I said just a little!
Careful!
You idiot!
He begins to regret taking advantage of the situation even when he knew that her father forced her to take such action, but doesn't dwell for too long as he sees that Eris is still by the door. He tells her that he's sorry. She says she'll forgive him since it's his birthday and tells him to wait 5 years when they're old enough to develop plot. Rudy is ecstatic by her words and promises to himself that he'll hold off until then. The next day, Rudy, Eris, and Ghislaine set out to an open field so that Rudy can teach them his best spell, Cumulonimbus. In the sky, they see a strange and mysterious object that has been accumulating mana over time. All around the world, people begin to sense the mana pooling in that area. We meet Perugius, a high-ranking member of the Dragon Tribe, one of the 7 great heroes, who sealed away the demon god Laplace 500 years ago. He senses the mana anomaly and sends his servant to investigate the strange occurrence. We also meet Kishirika, a member of the Demon Clan and daughter of the Demon God. Finally, we meet Orsted, who holds the current title as the Dragon God, the strongest member of the Dragon Tribe. He also senses the mana pool and decides to head towards that direction. We step back to the group as Rudy is ready to chant the words to the spell, but he stops as he sees the ominous clouds begin to darken. Ghislaine uses her cover die to see that there's a concentration of mana when suddenly the group is attacked. Perigeus' servant thinks Rudy is the one who caused the mana pool, but Ghislaine swears by her ranking title as the Sword King that he's mistaken. He recognizes her title as a Sword King and decides to trust her words for the time being. When he leaves, the mana disturbance activates, shooting down a beam of light.
Lady Eris, Rudius!
Looking like his past self, Rudy encounters a white figure who introduces himself as Hitogami, the man god. The man god tells Rudy that he's been watching him ever since he was born in his new world, telling him that he's been living quite the interesting life. Although sounding like a cunning individual that Rudy finds suspicious, Hitogami says that he is on Rudy's side and that he's decided to intervene in this moment to provide assistance. The man god gives Rudy a single tip: help the man with the green hair and rely on him to survive. Next, Rudy awakens in his current body and learns that he and Eris are stranded in the middle of the demon continent. He immediately meets the man with the green hair and notices the red gem on his forehead, confirming that the man is a Superd. Rudy can't help to feel extremely frightened as he arms his staff. The man does nothing and seems to expect the frightened reaction from Rudy. But he doesn't expect Rudy to begin speaking in the demon language. The man explains that he saw 2 children fall from the sky and created this fire since he knows that human children are frail. The man asks if the sight of him doesn't frighten him, and Rudy responds that it would be rude to be frightened of the man who saved his life, as the man realizes that Rudy is special. Rudy introduces himself and the man introduces himself as Rudyard. Rudy explains that he thinks that he and Eris got caught in a mana disaster that somehow teleported them to the demon continent, realizing now that he's a long way from home. But the man places his hand on Rudy's head and declares on the honor of the Superd that he will protect the 2 from harm until they reach their home. Just then, Eris wakes up and immediately screams. She hides in fear of the Superd that she sees before her eyes. Rudy is shocked at the overreaction as he watches Eris burst into tears. But Rudyard tells Rudy that this is the normal reaction when one sees a Superd. Eris eventually introduces herself once she hears that Rudyard is their savior, and after figuring out Rudyard is a normal dude, Eris is released from the strange curse that seemed to take control of her emotions. Come morning, the 3 travel through the desert-like terrain that fills the demon continent until they finally reach a village. Coincidentally, the village is the home of the Mage and Roxy's hometown. The village chief immediately recognizes Roxy's pendant that was gifted to Rudy, and Rudy finds out that the man next to the chief is Roxy's father. At night, the chief mentions that Rudyard saved one of the Magyard's children 10 years ago, and the Magyard in this village have also been lifted from the fear curse that plagued the Superd. Rudy finds out that Rudyard is set on a goal to restore his tribe's honor, conducting acts of goodwill throughout the demon continent. Rudy learns that the Superd tribe's reputation comes from the cursed spears they received from the demon god Laplace, which turned them into mindless murderers during the war 400 years ago. Rudyard boldly claims that he will not rest as the leader of the Superd until he restores the pride and honor of his people. Moved by Rudyard's determination, Rudy decides to help him in his quest. The next day, Eris receives a sword from the Magyar to use on her travels, and the 3 decide to head out on their long journey home. Eris wastes no time getting used to her sword. Soon after, the group approach Rikarisu City, where demon people are guarding the entrance. Security is extra tight since they have received wind of Dead End, the notorious nickname given to Rudyard as a feared criminal. Rudy swiftly changes the color of his hair, allowing them to slip through the gates unnoticed. The group first decide to head to the Adventurers Guild to make money. At the guild, Rudy pretends to be quite confident and arrogant, saying he's accompanied by Dead End. However, when Rudyard enters, everyone in the guild laughs at him, claiming that Superds have green hair and confirming Rudy's ploy to hide Rudyard's identity. Rudy does not disappoint us as he stares at the guild receptionist, who has an extra melon. They register themselves as adventurers and use Dead End as the name of their party. At a restaurant, Rudy and company meet Kurt, Bakiro, and Gablin, who are also new adventurers. Kurt accidentally breaks the button on Eris's shawl and receives a beating for destroying the first piece of clothing Rudy bought for her. Later, Rudy has a dream with the man god once again. This time, Hitogami advises him to accept the task of finding a lost kitten. The next day, the group accept the quest, and Rudyard uses his third eye to quickly track the kitten, leading them to a suspicious cave. There are several animals locked inside, and the group encounter 3 adventurers who are responsible for the kidnapping. However, they are apprehended by Dead End in no time at all. Rudy gets close to interrogate them, but their leader punches him. As Rudy is recovering from the attack, he sees a head rolling near him. Rudyard decapitated a man just for hitting a child. Rudy is shocked and insists Rudyard should keep the killing at a minimum if he wants to improve the reputation of the Superds, and invites the other 2 to join their party. After much quarrel and opposition from Rudyard, they accept and join them. Rudy plans on using their higher rank to complete higher level quests and in turn earn more money. Meanwhile, Roxy's heart flutters with relief as she scans the list of casualties and finds no mention of Rudy or his family after the magic disaster occurred. Elsewhere, Paul is with Norn, but there is still no trace of Zenith, Lilia, and Aisha as Paul is desperate to find them. Back to Rudy, the group take a quest to unravel the mystery of a creature lurking within the petrified forest. As they enter the shadowy expanse of the forest, they discover 2 other parties already on the same mission, including Kurt's group. Rudyard is worried about the kids and decide to follow Kurt's party. The group find Kurt's party being attacked by monsters, but Rudy insists on waiting until the last second to rescue them, so they would appreciate it more, completely disregarding the seriousness of the situation. Consequently, Gablin is killed, and the others are about to be killed before Rudyard and Eris save the other 2. Kurt is grateful to them, but are left with a feeling of grief and sorrow. Further in the forest, the group hear fighting and rush to the location. Rudy, Eris, and Rudyard find the mysterious monster is a giant red-headed cobra. They launch an attack, with Rudyard using his spear for close combat, while Rudy utilizes his magic spells. Although they were able to deal with the monster, they weren't on time to save the other party members, as Rudy realizes now that his selfish decisions led to multiple deaths. Back at the guild, the group find Nokapura, a humanoid horse who has figured out that they've been switching jobs to take higher level quests. He tries to blackmail the group, threatening to have their licenses revoked unless they hand over half of their earnings. However, Rudy doesn't take his shit. Rudy uses a spell to cast rain, which washes away the blue dye from Rudyard's hair. The fear curse strikes the hearts of everyone around, and Rudyard threatens Nokapura to never trouble them again. The guards chase after the notorious Dead End, but Rudyard escapes by leaping away. Rudy and Eris leave the city but find Rudyard later that night. Rudy apologizes to Rudyard for having such childish ideals up until now, but Rudyard forgives him, telling Rudy that he has witnessed Rudy's growth over time and can feel his resolve to protect Eris at all cost. The 2 reconcile their differences, forming an even stronger bond through mutual understanding. In the morning, Rudy wakes up to find Rudyard with a clean-shaven head, understanding that others will be more receptive to his good deeds without it. The group end up at a dock, finally ready to leave the demon continent. Excited to swim in the ocean, Eris strips, ready to dive in. However, Rudyard advises against it since the sea is teeming with monsters. Meanwhile, Roxy and her 2 companions arrive on the shore to look for Rudy, but they just miss him as the Dead End party boards a ship to speak to its captain. Rudy and his friends want safe passage from the Demon Continent to the Millis Continent, but the captain quotes an expensive price as he recognizes Rudyard as a Superd. The group decide to raise enough money for Rudyard's ticket before heading out. Later, Hitogami visits Rudy in his dream once more with another advice. He tells him to buy food from a street vendor and take a walk through the back alleys. While Eris strains with Rudyard,
何をする気かしら。
戦いの最中に気を抜くな。
Rudy follows the man god's advice, while Roxy appears near their vicinity. In the back alleys, Roxy is again seen dashing through the streets, but Rudy continues to miss the encounter. Eventually, he meets a strange, starving girl whom Rudy decides to feed. She introduces herself as Kishirika, the great emperor of the demon world. Rudy doesn't take her seriously, but decides to play along as he shows his respects to Her Highness. Appreciative of his demeanor, Kishirika offers to fulfill one wish. Rudy asks for wealth, power, and her body, respectively, but she denies all of them, since she doesn't have any of those things to give away. Instead, she gives him the demon eye of foresight, giving Rudy the ability to see into the future. With it, Rudy is able to beat Eris in a one-on-one battle, as he is able to predict all her moves. A week passes, and the group has no luck with their funds, prompting Rudy's decision to sell his staff for Rudyard. He tries to sneak out in the middle of the night, but Rudyard stops him and tries to convince him otherwise. Eventually, Rudyard goes against his morals of never committing a crime and says he'll allow them to stow him away. Suddenly, they are approached by Gallus Cleaner, a man who Rudy saved earlier, moments after he gained the power of foresight from Kishirika. He had pushed Gallus out of the way, as an empty pot almost fell on his head from a window above them in the narrow street. Elsewhere, Talhand, Alinalize, and Roxy arrive at the Adventurers Guild, looking for Paul's family. We find out that Alinalize and Talhand are both previous members of Paul's party, Fangs of the Black Wolf. They decide to focus on finding Lilia and Aisha, since Rudy is quite good at fighting and while Zenith is an S-rank mage. The next day, Roxy hilariously watches Rudyard and Eris sparring until she and her group find a lead and decide to leave town without crossing paths with Rudy. Later, Roxy walks in on Alinalize engaging in plot development with more than one goblin. Alinalize asks if Roxy wants to join, but unfortunately, this isn't Roxy's type of rodeo, so she uses an icicle blast to blow the goblins away. Meanwhile, Gallus agrees to transport Rudyard in exchange for liberating some smuggled goods once they reach Santport. Once they arrive at their destination, Rudy goes to pick up Rudyard since he traveled alone as a stowaway. When he meets up with him, Rudyard tells Rudy that there are 5 beast children imprisoned, and one has already been killed for crying too loudly, as they find out that the smuggled goods were actually human-trafficked beast kids. Rudyard tells Rudy that he'll take responsibility for murdering the scum before them. He eliminates every single one of them, while Rudy heals all the children and escape. On their way back, the children tell him there was someone else at the compound. Rudy returns and sure enough, finds a giant dog that he hugs and pets since it's so soft and fluffy. Suddenly, Rudy is apprehended by the beastmen, paralyzing him and tying him up. Rudy finds himself trapped in a wooden cage, hanging from tree branches and vines. He considers breaking the lock to escape, but decides to figure out what's going on before he makes any rash decisions. The villagers mock Rudy, believing that he kidnapped the beast children. Rudy pleads that he is innocent, but no one believes him. No clue as to where he is, Rudy decides to maintain the status quo and wait for Rudyard and Eris to rescue him. One day another man, Geese, is thrown in prison with Rudy. He tells him he's quite famous for quote-unquote attacking the Doldia's sacred beast while it was in heat. For beast people, petting a beast while in heat is equivalent to sexually arousing it.
Right there. You're pretty good at this, new guy.
I can do just about anything.
Then can you satisfy 100 women at once?
Later that night, Rudy makes Geese massage his back, and the two bond as they find out they are both equally perverted guys. Suddenly, Rudy senses smoke and heat, while his foresight shows him the entire forest will soon be on fire. As his foresight is made true, the two break their lock and escape. The entire village is under attack, and the children are mercilessly killed. Rudy summons a thunderstorm and puts out the fire. Understanding now that Rudy isn't a bad person, the Beastman asks for his help to retrieve the kidnapped children. They find out Gallus is a North Saint and is the man behind the devastation. He strikes a low blow and takes a child hostage. The Beast Man is injured in the fight. Suddenly, the Sacred Beast jumps in and fights against Gallus. Together with the Sacred Beast, Rudy is able to win the fight, but faints from exhaustion. Rudy wakes up in the Doldia chief's house and is more than happy to see Eris. The Beast Man, Jais, apologizes for the misunderstanding. Eris tells him all that happened in the past week and thinks it'll be a great story to tell her grandfather. Meanwhile, Soros, as the mayor of the Fidoa region who was in charge during the Mana disaster, is held responsible for the incident and executed. With his dying breath, he wishes Eris safety and happiness. Back to our protagonist, Rudy is caught red-handed, shamelessly peeping at Eris and her new beast friends, including Tona, the daughter of Jais. Eris tries to teach the beast children her language when Jais notices the ring on her finger is from the Doldia tribe. She says Ghislaine gave it to her on her 10th birthday and realizes she belongs to this tribe as well. Jais and Ghislaine seem to have some history as he's surprised that she's still alive. He tells them that she abandoned her duty to guard the forest and the sacred beast and is shamed as a traitor in their tribe. When he leaves, Eris runs after them to defend her master's name. Witnessing Eris's passionate plea, Jais wonders if Ghislaine has really changed for the better. The next day, Tona and her friend ask Eris more about Auntie Ghislaine and learn that Ghislaine is Jais' younger sister. Tona hates her sword lessons, but insists that Eris should tutor her in the same way that Ghislaine does, and Jais overhears their conversation. Rudy and Jais watch as the girls practice, and Jais is surprised to learn his sister is now a sword king. 3 months later, the rainy season is almost over, allowing our group to move on from the village. Attached to Eris now, Tona tells her not to leave. The two of them get into a physical fight, as both are terrible at communicating their emotions. However, later that night, Jais talks some sense into Tona, giving his own example. He regretted parting ways with Ghislaine on bad terms and wished he could have done more for her. So that night, Tona visits Eris, and Tona apologizes. Before the group departs, Jais requests Eris to spar with him once more, as he wants to see what Ghislaine has taught her. The match ends after one quick attack as Eris expresses her frustration, implying that Jais won the match. The group say their farewells and depart. While on the way, Guy catches up with them to hitch a ride in their carriage to the central continent. The party of 4 continue on their journey, but just before they arrive at Milis, Guy parts ways with them. They arrive at their inn, and Rudy suggests they should camp here for now. Moreover, since it's been a year and a half since they teleported, he wants to send a letter to his family to try and get in touch with them. He thinks of another idea for Rudyard to improve the Superd's reputation. They would help people, then reveal his identity and gift them a figurine of Rudyard to remember him by. The next day, while Rudy is writing his letter, his mind wanders as he looks out the window and sees a child being kidnapped. He follows the kidnappers to where they've held the boy hostage and finds some panties in a crate, which he wears on his face before confronting them. Suddenly, a girl in very minimal clothing arrives and fights, but it's hard for him to concentrate. Their leader arrives, and Rudy feels a familiarity in his fighting style. The stranger cuts the panties off his face, and Rudy looks up to see none other than his father. Paul has been worried about his family all this time and blames Rudy for running off on an adventure with some rich girl and showing no concern for his family's safety. Rudy feels injustice from his father's words as he doesn't hold back, telling him off. The two get into a fight at a bar with Rudy taunting Paul for roaming around with half-naked women and pretending to be worried about Zenith and Lilia. Suddenly, Norn intervenes and pushes Rudy off Paul, telling him to leave her father alone. Paul explains he formed the search party to look for everyone who had been teleported, but hasn't found any of his family members yet. The two separate on bad terms as Rudy returns to the inn where Eris comforts him. It turns out that Geese and Paul are friends, as Geese enters the bar and finds Paul drowning himself in guilt and alcohol. Geese makes Paul realize how happy Rudy was to reconcile with at least one member of his family. Geese helps Paul see things from a different point of view, and how caught up he's been on finding his loved ones, that he didn't realize that one just walked through the door. Geese tells him it's no easy feat to survive on the demon continent, and that despite being a genius, Rudy is still just a child who just walked halfway across the globe to make it to this very point. Realizing his flaws, Paul decides to make amends with his son. The next day, Eris, Rudyard, and Rudy are having breakfast at a restaurant when Paul arrives. They both take turns apologizing, and Rudy says he's going to escort Eris home. However, Paul tells him the towns and people have all vanished, but he still insists on seeing Eris home. After that, Rudy says he'll look for Lilia, Aisha, and Zenith. Rudy looks at Paul's face to see a father who realizes his own faults, and a man who is just worried about finding everyone he lost. He suggests they should forget they met yesterday and restart the events here. He jumps into Paul's arms as Paul welcomes Rudy back.
俺も会いたかった。
Later, Eris is still mad about how Paul treated him and how miserable Rudy was, but she finally comes around. But nevertheless, Paul gives Rudy enough money to comfortably travel back to the Fidoa region, since Eris is adamant on going back and seeing the destruction for herself. The group say their farewells to Paul and Norn as they leave the city the next day. They travel a short distance when they encounter the North god Kalman's pupil, Rodriguez. He calls out our group for traveling with a superd, prompting him to duel Rudyard. But he's no match against Rudyard as he is easily beaten. He leaves with Rudy's sculpture, hoping to meet and duel with him again. Along the way, other adventurers continue to pick a fight with Rudyard, but continue to fail, since Rudyard is just a badass. Eventually, they board a boat once more as they head off the central continent. Meanwhile, Roxy decides to visit her parents, who haven't seen her since she ran away from home. Everyone in her small village can communicate telepathically, except Roxy, which always made her feel like an outcast. Her parents are thrilled to see their daughter after such a long time and greet her excitedly. They make breakfast for her the next morning, and tell her that Rudy visited them with Eris and Rudyard. She is relieved to hear he is safe, and realizes that Dead End must be Rudy and his party. She, Elinalize, and Talhan decide to head north to find Lilia, Aisha, and Zenith. Meanwhile, Hitogami visits Rudy in his dream. It's been a year since his last appearance, and this time, Rudy begins first, asking for advice on how to find his family. He agrees if Rudy decides to trust him a little more. Rudy agrees, and the man god tells him that he will encounter Aisha soon, but that he must not reveal his identity to her. Rudy must give her the opportunity to confide in him and then send a letter to someone at the Palace of Chiron. Next, the group arrive at the Chiron Kingdom. He writes a letter to Roxy, thinking she'll be surprised that he is in town, unbeknownst to her actual location. He walks through the streets, wondering about the place the man god had shown him in his vision, when he comes across Aisha and two palace guards. The men claim to be bringing her home, but Aisha says they stole her letter. She runs up behind him, and Rudy uses magic to get them to safety. Aisha introduces herself and tells him her mother is trapped inside the castle, so she's trying to send a letter to her father. When he asks if she has any siblings, Aisha responds, saying her older brother is just a pervert, as Rudy realizes that Aisha is a bit too smart for her age. He takes her back to their inn, and Rudy decides to wait to hear from Roxy before storming the castle to save Lilia. The next morning, Ginger York, a member of the King's Royal Guard, visits them and tells him Lady Roxy has summoned him. They arrive and Rudy doesn't suspect a thing, but walks into a trap laid by Roxy's student, Prince Bax Chiron, the 7th prince of the Chiron Kingdom. Rudy sees Lilia bound and gagged at his feet as the prince imprisons Rudy. Rudy is now at the mercy of Zanoba Chiron, the 3rd prince, who enters the room to interrogate him about a sculpture. Rudy says he doesn't know much about it, when Zanoba reveals that the Roxy figure he made is in his possession. He launches into an elaborate description of how the figurine is a masterpiece and how the artist is a genius. Rudy notices the mole under her arm is gone, and Zanoba says he removed it to refine its beauty. Rudy chastises Zanoba for his insolence, arguing that he has ruined a perfect masterpiece through his tampering. Zanoba, realizing now that Rudy is the great master artist, shames himself for defiling the masterpiece with his dirty hands. After losing his shit, Zanoba requests Rudy to take him as his student. Meanwhile, Rudy and Eris join forces with some guards, who tell them Rudy is trapped in the palace basement and offer their assistance in exchange for their help to save their families, who are also trapped in the palace. The guards explain Prince Bax has taken their families hostage to control them. Rudy offers to help while Eris watches Aisha. Back to Rudy, he offers to make Zanoba his apprentice in exchange for setting him free. Later that night, Zanoba, being the more powerful prince, drags Pax out of bed and forces him to free Rudy. The guards reunite with their families, while Lilia reunites with Aisha as they embrace each other with joy. Aware now of his presence, Lilia returns Rudy's favorite possession, Roxy's panties. She requests Rudy to take Aisha with him so that she could serve him, but he doesn't allow it, knowing the dangers that they will face in their travels. Sometime later, the party is traveling through Red Dragon Mountain to reach the Firoa region of Asura Kingdom. One night, after a brief spar, Rudy acknowledges Eris as a warrior. An astonished Eris asks Rudy to pinch her to check if it's not a dream. Rudy asks Eris if she'll not punch him if he does so, to which Eris tells she won't. Rudy playfully pinches her chest, and Eris sends him flying nevertheless. The next day, the group decide to take a safer route to avoid any fights with a group of red dragons. But Eris suggests that they should just climb the mountain and fight them. Both Rudy and Rudy reject this plan, since fighting a herd of red dragons is very risky. Rudy is surprised to hear that even people that strong will have a hard time against red dragons. Suddenly, Rudy and Eris stop moving, stiff as rocks. In the thick of the mist, a tall man in white is seen coming in their direction, along with a masked girl with black hair. Rudy warns both Rudy and Eris not to move at any cost, as the two pass them by. Hearing that voice, the man in white stops and asks him if he is Rudy Superdia. He then looks at Eris and asks if she is Eris Boreas Greyrat. The man then looks at Rudy and says he doesn't know who he is. Rudy and Eris asks him how he knows them, to which he comments that it is a strange place for them to meet, and turns back to leave. Rudy, now curious about this person, calls at him and introduces himself. He then asks for that man's name, to which he answers his name is Orsted. Rudy asks Orsted if he knows Rudy and Eris, to which he answers that they haven't properly been acquainted yet. Orsted asks which Greyrat family Rudy is from and what his father's name is. Rudy responds that his father's name is Paul Greyrat. To his surprise, Orsted comments that Paul is supposed to have only 2 daughters. Orsted then asks Rudy why Rudy doesn't look away, to which Rudy responds that he sort of wants to, since Orsted is quite intimidating. Rudy then asks if he knows anything about the Monocalamity. Annoyed by the question, Orsted says he doesn't know anything. Rudy then thanks him and turns back to leave, when Orsted asks if he knows anything about the word Hitogami. Rudy immediately turns back and says he knows about him, when suddenly, in the blink of an eye, Orsted attacks. Orsted looks at Rudy with rage, saying Rudy is an apostle of Hitogami. He then approaches Rudy to finish him. Eris comes roaring at him with her sword, but her swing is easily stopped. Orsted catches Rudy and punctures his lungs, telling him to inform Hitogami before dying that the dragon god, Orsted, will kill him soon. Eris makes a desperate attempt to attack Orsted, but is too injured to do so. Rudy then builds up his mana to make a very powerful spell and fires, managing to injure him. Orsted notices that Rudy can use magic without incantations, and asks if he learned that from Hitogami. Rudy uses wind magic to breathe, and then builds up a spell in his right hand. Orsted sucks the magic built by Rudy. Rudy then uses wind magic to fall back and starts developing a very strong fire magic and fires at Orsted. He then lifts Rudy and asks why he doesn't heal himself with incantation-less magic and goes on to thrust his hand through Rudy's chest. Eris begins to cry and pleas for help. As Rudy loses consciousness, Rudy hears the masked girl tell Orsted that he might be useful in the future. Rudy suddenly finds himself in the void dimension. He looks at his body and finds a hole in his chest. Hitogami appears and says that he wasn't expecting Rudy would meet Orsted so soon. Rudy then asks Hitogami why Orsted attacked him after hearing his name. Hitogami starts explaining that Orsted is an evil dragon god, and he hates him since he is a virtuous human god. Rudy asks why he didn't inform him beforehand about his meeting with Orsted. Hitogami says that he can't see anything about Orsted since he is a cursed being. He goes on to explain that Orsted was born as a cursed child, which made living creatures of that world to either hate him or fear him. Rudy says that it is a very sad curse as he empathizes with Orsted, thinking back to his previous life when he felt like he was also afflicted with the same curse. He then asks Hitogami why he didn't hate or fear Orsted, to which he answers that Rudy is originally from another world, so he isn't afflicted by the curses in this world. Hitogami says that Rudyard's curse is similar, and Rudy begins to think that helping Rudyard is a lost cause. But Hitogami says that on the contrary, Rudy's help has been effective, as the supered curse has been slowly fading away, especially after Rudy shaved off Rudyard's head. The man god tells Rudy that he can continue to build their reputation by doing good deeds. Satisfied with that response, Rudy then asks how he can defeat Orsted. The man god says Orsted can't be defeated since he is the most powerful person in the world. Rudy gets suspicious since Hitogami seems to know a lot about Orsted even though he can't see him, but says he doesn't care about it since he is already dead. Hitogami then tells Rudy that he has the wrong idea and that he is still alive, pointing at his chest, which now doesn't have a hole. Rudy wakes up on Eris's lap, who explains to him that after he passed out, Nanahos he asked Orsted to heal him. Rudy, filled with mixed emotions, hugs Eris. She asks if she can punch him, which Rudy accepts, but she punches him softly and starts crying, telling him that she is glad that he is still alive. At night, Rudyard asks Rudy about the man god, as he finds it hard to believe that their fates are intertwined with two gods. Rudy relays Hitogami's words that Laplace transferred his curse to the Superds, which is why their reputation is so bad. But he reassures him that their efforts are not in vain, as the effects have been fading ever since Rudyard shaved his head. After some time, the group finally arrive at the Boreas estate, but as expected, nothing is left. As their long journey has met its end, Rudyard thanks Rudy for giving him a new perspective on life, for giving him a way to accomplish his goals in ways that he would have never thought of himself. Rudyard says that he would have never been able to do anything to restore his reputation without him. He also compliments Eris on how talented and strong she has become, and tells her that she has the ability to become stronger than him one day. And with those words, the three struggled to hold back their tears as they finally part ways. Rudy and Eris visit the tents for the survivors when they reunite with Ghislaine. Eris is informed of her parents' and grandfather's death and hears that Lord Philip and Lady Hilda teleported together and unfortunately passed away in hostile territory. Alphonse also tells her that Lord Pyleman Noto's Grey Rat wishes to take her in as his concubine. Ghislaine is furious, but Alphonse says Notos is a lord and he's just thinking of the future of the Boreas household even if it means sacrificing Eris to marriage. After taking in too much for any child to handle, Eris asks to be left alone. Later, Rudy is relieved to find that Sylphie is not on the list of casualties. Later that night, Eris tells Rudy that she wants to start a family with him since the family she once had is gone. She tells him that she's moving up their promise and that she is ready to sleep with him now. Even though Rudy has been waiting for this moment for a long time, he hesitates since he doesn't want to take advantage of the girl he loves in her most vulnerable moment. However, Eris insists, telling him that she wants to have his babies to start a family. And so finally, the moment of truth happens, as our protagonist, after living two lives, has finally popped his cherry. The next morning, Rudy wakes up cheerful and excited to spend the day with Eris. But to his surprise, he checks the bed to see it vacant, with a batch of red hair on the floor. Rudy finds a letter on the desk that reads, "Rudy, you and I are not a good match. I am going away." Alphonse informs Rudy that Eris left with Ghislaine on a journey, specifically telling him to not inform Rudy of their destination. Heartbroken, Rudy cries as he walks alone, basking in a feeling of betrayal and sorrow. We find out that Eris left Rudy to get stronger. She tells Ghislaine that Rudy protected her this entire time, but that despite her training, she couldn't do anything for Rudy, especially when he needed it the most during the Orsted fight. She declares that she loves him and will train to be strong enough to beat the Dragon God and be the one to protect Rudy moving forward. Meanwhile, Ruijerd is seen saving some people from a monster. The people thank him for his help as we find out that the fear curse has finally been lifted. We also catch up on Zanoba, traveling in a carriage, hopeful that he will one day be reunited with his master. Tona, Tersna, and Jais treasure the figurines they have of Rudy, Eris, and Ruijerd. Roxy, Talhand, and Kishirika are seen partaking in a drinking contest. Aisha and Lilia return to Paul, and he's relieved to see them both safe and sound. Norn misses her mother, but Paul reassures her that she and Rudy will return soon. Back to Roxy, Kishirika helps Roxy locate Zenith and provides her exact location on the Bagherit continent, in the labyrinth city of Rapan. But for some reason, even her demon eyes can't see her clearly. She can also see Rudy and tells Roxy that he's on the central continent looking quite glum. Roxy is upset to hear he's depressed, but believes that Rudy will get back on his feet and goes to rescue Zenith with Alinalize and Talhand. Back to our protagonist, Rudy spends days in his bed. He feels the same sensation that he used to feel in his previous life, drowning in his own self-pity, rejected and alone. But then he begins to remember the good times he had with his family in his new life, and begins to realize that one of them is still in danger. He builds up his resolve, ready to take another step forward, as he sets out on his journey to find Zenith and face the many challenges that await him. As a bonus clip before the end of the episode, we see a white-haired figure who has a striking resemblance of an older Sylphie talking to a group about admitting Rudy to Renoa University. If you made it this far, I appreciate you for being just as big of a fan of this incredible anime as I am. Like and subscribe to my channel, as we'll be following Rudy's journey in the next season that is coming out this year. Have a great day and see you in the next episode.